Hi. Hi.
Uh, Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for agreeing to an interview, by the way.
Yeah, of course. I really love, sorry, one sec. I really love the work that this organization is doing. I've also been involved with like women's leadership stuff in high school and now in college too. So
Mhm.
I think it's really cool that you're doing something like that, especially something on an online platform, which is something that I wish we had done too.
Yeah. Especially with like all the social media today and all like everyone's basically connected on the internet. I think like this was something that me and a couple of my friends were like really interested in doing, and we just wanted to reach out to a
Hmm.
bunch of like kind of like older sister figures or like people who were older than us and had like more experience, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like, took a look at your website. I thought that looked really cool. And I know you all have it like a social media page, which is
Mhm.
awesome. So you guys are doing such cool work.
Oh, thank you so much. I guess
Yeah,
we
of
can,
course.
yeah. I guess we can get started with some of the questions I sent you actually. So for the first one, with what kind of challenges did you face as a girl, and what did you do to grow from it? Could you answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I think personally, I feel like a lot of young women go through a lot of the same challenges in terms of just mostly getting in their own way. And I would say that those are some kinds of like the biggest challenges that young women actually face are challenges not only from like externally, but also internally in terms of how like society socializes young women to behave in certain ways and act in certain ways that might not often be in line with their like ambitions or pursuing their dreams. So a lot of it is kind of overcoming those like internal doubts or internal insecurities.
Mhm.
And I think it is like a little bit of a different process for young women than for young men because of the different ways that people are taught based on like their gender at birth. So I would say that like a lot of the ways in which you grow from these things is you just have to learn to overcome some of these internal doubts and insecurities that you might have by like doing cool things and putting yourself out there and challenging these assumptions. So even though you start out maybe believing that you're not qualified or talented enough to do a certain thing, you learn to feel that you can overcome these challenges that you're setting up for yourself by actually going out there and doing those things.
Mhm.
And obviously, it's like all a learning process. I don't think I know anyone who's like perfectly secure or like perfectly confident in themselves. Um, but I think it's something that you really do grow from, and you just have to continuously challenge.
Yeah, I think I really agree with your point about how there isn't like one person in the world who's like continuously like reassured that what they're doing is like 100% right, and they never have any self-doubts. And I think like especially as girls and women, where a large portion of like our own thoughts about ourselves are like are these self-doubt kind of mentality. I think that we can kind of even use that kind of thought and just kind of capitalize it and use it as kind of like a positive reinforcement that even though I might not be 100% sure in what I'm doing right now, I can rest assured that if I put my best foot forward, what I'm presenting to the world is what I want to show. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was reading this like piece from the Wall Street Journal the other day, and they said, I forget what the exact quote was, but they said something along the lines of like, instead of thinking of just all the risk that you're taking when you do make a decision, think about the risk you're taking by just like staying in place and not taking this action that might lead you to something that's really good. So I think that's like a cool philosophy to kind of go into like life with, because you really often think like, oh, I'm so scared that if I take this action I might lose this or I might lose that, but you also need to think about like what you could be missing if you don't take this action that you might want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Did you have any female leaders that you really looked up to when you were growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think I necessarily looked up to a lot of female leaders. I think I mostly what I like to do is I like to look at the people around me and really learn from them, because I think a lot of celebrities are kind of far off and distant from us. So they present like a certain side of themselves that is very admirable, definitely, and there is a lot of stuff to learn from them. Like, but I do think that the people who are around us are the people who are the most real and the most raw. And so I prefer to just like take the good qualities, and really learn from the people around me as opposed to people who might be a little bit more far off or disconnected, from like our reality. Even though I do think that like there are plenty of female leaders out there, who are very worthy of being looked up to. I think the people who are often ignored a little more are the people who are just like right by our sides. So like I look up to like all of my friends. I look up to like all of my professors, etc. I just think that like the people around us are like the real unsung heroes, you know? So I would say that those are the people that I look up to the most.
Yeah, I can definitely relate because I think it's like the people we come in contact with a lot, and that's a much more easier to like apply kind of situation because we see them more on a day-to-day basis and we can kind of see each other's growth and kind of like different mindsets reflected in each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely with like some female leaders, they're definitely, I think society and like people as a whole put them up in this really high pedestal. And sometimes we might not be able to really relate to them, but rather we can kind of look at the people around us for like inspiration instead. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think especially like women leaders, people tend to think that like women need to be perfect.
Hmm.
And so whenever like a woman leader maybe does something that's like controversial or something that's wrong, she's really quickly like picked apart. And I think that's a terrible thing to do, but I also think like that's why people shouldn't just like idolize certain people, because every person has something that they probably have done wrong or like made a mistake on at some point. And I think it's very easy to like, when it's a celebrity or someone who's like a very famous female leader, to kind of idolize them. And I think it's a lot easier to look up to people, who are around you in a very like real way.
Yeah, exactly. Like someone who isn't doesn't seem to be just like a woman superhero, but someone that you can relate to day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
So what struggles do you think that you and your peers really struggle with? And what are
Mhm.
some ways that you think we can kind of encourage each other to overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. So, I think a lot of times, kind of going back to like the first question,
Hmm.
women struggle with a lot of insecurities. So I know this study has been like kind of passed around a lot, but I've read like different studies that tell you that men will apply for a job even if they don't check off like a lot of the qualifications, whereas women might feel like they need to check off all of the qualifications in order to apply for a job. And I think same goes for like asking for a promotion or like being your own advocate. And I think that kind of comes from like these internal insecurities, as well as other ways we've been socialized, like the need to be like perfect, the need to be like a good fit for this. And I think the advice, or like the best way to kind of combat this, is just to go for it. One thing that I found is really, really useful is just like whenever I'm like facing some kind of decision that I'm not sure whether is a good thing to go for, I'll turn to like a support network and just ask for their opinions. And most of the time, if this is something that's really meaningful or can be impactful, then they'll usually like encourage me to go for it, because having that really supportive group of women is like something that's really, really important and helps like keep your insecurities in check, because you might not be able to see that you are qualified or that you are good, but your friends can definitely see it, and your support network can definitely see it. So I think that's something that's really helpful for all like young women to do in particular,
Hmm.
because it's a great way to just kind of connect with other people and to have other people kind of be your cheerleader even when you can't be your own.
Yeah, for sure. I think like a large portion, just like a lot of times, I feel like girls and women really get into our own heads and we kind of don't have the means to kind of step out of it and realize that, oh, I may be part of something bigger or I may be more qualified than I think I am personally. And I think like if we just rely on the support group and like the community who have many of the same struggles, I think we'll be able to like help each other and just kind of like grow from a lot of certain obstacles as well. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
mhm. So why do you think it's so important or imperative for young women to kind of understand the importance of leadership and initiating conversations and such?
Hmm. Yeah, I think one main reason is because if you're not leading or if you're not taking initiative, then someone else will be.
Yeah.
Like that hole that's not filled by you will end up being filled by someone else, you know. And
Mhm.
very often, because of how things currently work, that person will likely be a man, right? So if it's not you who's taking leadership or if it's not you who's taking action, then someone else will. And so if it's something that you really want to go for, then I think it's like a really great thing and like you should just go for it, you know.
Mhm.
In terms of like leadership and like starting those conversations initially, I think that leadership is really important because it kind of gives people something to aspire to. Like if you don't know that like any woman has held this role before, the next generation might be less likely to go for it as
Yeah,
well.
for sure.
So knowing that there's been a precedent that's been set before is something that can really, really motivate young women in the future to also go for it. And I think starting conversations is always important because speaking up and letting people know what you stand for, letting people um, know who you are. And this
Mhm.
could be a great way to get people to also advocate for you if that's something that is necessary in that certain situation. So if I think a lot of times if you don't speak up, then people don't really know where you're coming from.
Exactly.
So you just need to kind of be direct and convey your feelings and your thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, especially with all of our culture, kind of just like, oh, just don't let the women speak, let the man speak. Like, we need to kind of pay attention to like both sides of the story. And I think really, especially with your president, I think it's a really cliche example, but America has never had a woman female president yet, and I think like that kind of has such a large stigma around it as well, just like, oh, women aren't fit for this role just yet. But I think that if we allow for women to kind of realize that yes, we can take these leadership opportunities, then so many more like so it will have kind of like a ripple effect throughout our whole bias and our whole community and our whole culture as well. So yeah, exactly, it's really important for us to just take the first step forward and just go for it in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think especially having like that precedent is something that's really important and can motivate other young women to take action. But one thing that I would also add is I think it's important for society to continue to also take action. So I was listening to this podcast and I forget what country it was. I believe it was I don't remember what country it was, but I remember that this country had its first woman president, and after that, everyone kind of just patted themselves on the back and they were like, oh, we're equal now, you know, now that we've had our first female leader. And then for so many years after that, they never had another female,
Cool.
female head of state. And it's yeah, they still haven't to this day. So I think a lot of times what ends up happening too, which is something that's really dangerous, and why it can't just be like one and done kind of thing,
Mhm.
because while that does inspire a lot of other people to take action, it also makes I would say like general society like more complacent,
Mhm.
because they think that they've already kind of solved this problem and they just pat themselves on the back and move on to the next issue. And often it can kind of make this like innate sexism a little bit worse because
Yeah.
they think they're now like morally justified in making fun of someone for their gender, right? So I think like not only do you need to take action and like that will cause a lot of other people to take action, but also like it needs to be like an ongoing conversation as well. So I think that's something that's really important.
Yeah, like we need to continue striving to be better and better rather than just being like, oh, yay, we elected a female leader in this category. Now everything is suddenly solved and we can do whatever we want now. I think we just need to continue our culture and kind of just redirect everything to just kind of allow for more growth rather than just being, okay, we hit this checkbox. Now we can do something else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So in your opinion, what do you think is like the single or like most important or root cause of the confidence gap between men and women? And how do you think we might be able to kind of combat it as well?
Mhm. I would say it's the standards, the different standards that we have for men and women. So I would say that like men are told to more often act on instinct and go with their initial thought and be bold, whereas women are told to be a little bit more restrained,
Mhm.
and be a little bit more risk averse. And I don't think there's like a single root cause, obviously, but I think a lot of it starts at a very early age with telling certain people like how they should or shouldn't behave, the like gender stereotypes that we see in the news, etc. So I would say that that causes a lot of the initial distinction.
Mhm.
And because that starts at such an early age, it
Mhm.
just kind of amplifies as we go on.
Mhm.
So I would say that the primary way in which we're able to combat it is to stop like bad behavior and encourage good behavior at an early age. So, I think in the like, I don't even know what like age this was in, but even in the early 2000s, I think a lot of people were like, oh, boys will be boys. I think that's something that's a problematic thing to say because I don't think like boys will be boys is a good excuse for bad behavior.
Mhm.
I think rather it should be that like people should act like good people, right? I think that
Yeah.
should be kind of the saying that we go into all of this with, because regardless of what your gender is, um, it doesn't matter. You should just try and be a good person. And when you're socializing different genders in different ways, I think that causes a lot of differences in how genders react to things.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I think that's something that we can start to try and combat at an early age. Obviously, it's not like an end all be all. There
Yeah.
needs to be also like more change in terms of organizational structure, more changes later in life.
Mhm.
But that's like a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Especially since I think some of these standards and such, exactly, they're imposed when we're just like kids, and kind of that kind of stigma and that kind of like thought pattern kind of just continues to evolve and grow as we grow older as well. Like, for example, if you were a young girl in like elementary school and you were told that, oh, you can't do XYZ, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get up the guts and have a confidence to do the same exact thing when you were older. And I think exactly just like we need to kind of just shift our whole thinking and shift our whole like kind of just like thought pattern as well, because if we continue to have the mindset that, oh, it's okay, he's just doing this because he's a boy, like that just grows, that just will turn around and kind of just bite us in the back as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of young women are like grow up being told like, oh, girls aren't good at math or girls aren't good at science, and I think that discourages a lot of people initially from trying to like go for things that they might really be passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And in recent years, I think there have been a lot of good programs that have been trying to fight this, right? Like I know there's like Girls Who Code is like something for girls who are
Mm-hmm.
interested in CS, um, and like other organizations kind of like that. So I think like those things are like a good step in the right direction, kind of trying
Yeah.
to combat those initial things that people might have been told in their younger days and trying to change that stereotype and give more representation to women in fields where they're not traditionally represented.
Yeah, for sure. So, I know that for your kind of passion for economics, marketing, and research, it's like rather kind of like a male dominated situation, or like where it's primarily it's not as female oriented, I might say. So
Mhm.
what kind of advice would you give to these girls who are also pursuing like very similar passions that you are interested in as well?
Mhm. Yeah. So I would say that like my primary interest lies in really making a meaningful impact on the organizations and the people around me, and
Mhm.
that these like things that I'm studying, like economics and understanding marketing and trying to do research, are all just like good ways for me to try and get there. So they're like really
Mhm.
interesting tools that I'd like to study in order to try and understand like people and the way organizations function and stuff, in order to get to that end goal of really making like a meaningful change or solving some kind of problem.
Mhm.
And so I think in terms of these fields in particular, as someone who hasn't like actually truly entered the workforce yet, there's not too much for me to say in terms of how to work with like colleagues on this,
Mhm.
in this respect, or like how to advocate for yourself and get a promotion or negotiate for higher pay, because I haven't really been through that process.
Mhm.
But I will say that I have been in situations where um, most of my colleagues, who are like interning with me, for example, are male, or all the people that I'm working with on a project are male.
Mhm.
And I think that's really interesting because there are certainly like different dynamics that are created when there's only men in a room. And that's something that I've like noticed through just like seeing my male friends hang out with their friends, right? So
Mhm.
I think there is definitely a difference when it is a very male dominated space. But one piece of advice that I would give is like, you should always try to like find mutual ground. People tend to trust you, your ideas, your opinions a lot more when they first trust and like you as a person.
Mhm.
And I think in terms of connecting to anyone, it's really the process of just finding common ground and really feeling like you're relating to each other.
Mhm.
So I've read before that some women, before they go into like important boardroom meetings or negotiations, they like to read up on sports news from the previous day before. I personally have never done that, but that's like one tip that people have given before.
Mhm.
I think the primary thing is just establishing that you are someone who has valuable opinions,
Mhm.
and to really speak up for yourself, because it's very easy to like be dominated in a room full of all men who are kind of talking about their, who aren't afraid to like voice their own
Yeah.
opinions. And obviously I think like it's a problem that this even needs to be a conversation in the first place,
Mhm.
but for now, as we are trying to kind of equalize things, I think these tips can be important for helping like certain individuals advance forward and really be able to voice their ideas.
Yeah, for sure. I think, especially with like kind of your example of just being in a room full of men and just feeling like a certain energy from them with like,
Mhm.
and like a difference between that, I think exactly like emphasizing the fact that we're kind of all similar and we have similar interests and similar like a similar goal in mind as well, just kind of wanting to work together and kind of further develop what you guys are trying to preserve. I think that's like a really important part in just getting both sides to realize and respect each other, which is like ultimately what we're trying to do, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I think
for
that's
sure.
great.
I guess that's pretty much it for today's conversation. I just wanted to thank you again so much for agreeing to an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Very happy to be here. And if you ever want to collaborate with our organization,
Oh, for
um,
sure.
just let me know. Yeah, because I think it would be great to kind of explore what potential partnerships we could have. I'd also be happy to put you in touch with some of my friends who I'm sure would be like really happy to do something like this, because
Awesome.
they're really cool women. So yeah.
Oh, wow, that'd be so awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely interested. But yeah.
Great.